Hey guys, my name is Nitesh Jangir and I am working as a data engineer at Velotio. For today's short video, I'll be talking about the Kafka on cloud and on-premise Kafka. And I'll also do some comparison between different providers of Kafka like Confluent, AWS MSK is there, and how both the services are less cumbersome as compared to on-premise Kafka. So by end of this video, you'll have a better understanding about which Kafka service would be better for your project. So on this note, let's get dive into Kafka's world. So let's start with the agenda for the today's short. So first of all, I'll be talking about the communication. What are the different communication protocol, and then scalability and availability is also a major factor while choosing the Kafka. Then I'll show you some the deployment and management points, which points you need to keep in mind while choosing the Kafka over others. And then lastly, I'll show you the security and pricing points. So let's move on to the our next slide, that is the communication. So when we talk about the communication, the first thing comes to our mind is the communication protocol. So for Confluence, it supports a communication through various protocol like Kafka's native protocol. You can also use the REST proxy and MQTT servers as well. And for AWS MSK, it utilizes the standard Kafka protocol for communication. And the same goes with the on-premise Kafka. On-premise Kafka communicates using the Kafka's native protocol. So for in case of the network configuration, AWS MSK integrates with AWS VPCs for network isolation and security, because VPC is more isolated entity and more secure as compared to other you can say cloud private network. So in case of Confluent, it offers flexibility in configuring network settings for communication within Confluent platform components. And for on-premise Kafka, it requires some manual network configuration and firewall rules for communication. You also need to write down the rules for firewall as well. Intercluster communication. So intercluster communication is communication between two or more clusters, and where the Confluent have the rich feature like mirror maker for replicating data between amongst the cluster, and AWS MSK also allows the cross region replication for intercluster communication. And while setting up your on-premise Kafka, you need to manually configure for the cross cluster replication. So yeah, so let's move on to our next slide, that is the scalability and availability. So if I talk about the Confluent scalability, then there are the two important factors. First is the horizontal scalability, and second is the component scalability. So in horizontal scalability, it uses the Kafka cluster, allowing you to add more broker nodes to handle increased load. So whenever your loads is increased, so it automatically uh, add the brokers to in horizontal manner. And for component scalability, the Confluent ecosystem includes like various component. Kafka Connect is there, Kafka Streams is there, schema registry is also there, so which can be scaled individually. Let's say your Kafka Connect is more loaded as compared to whole Kafka, so you can just use the component scalability over there and increase the number of cores for particularly Kafka Connect. So you no need to increase the whole Kafka. Instead, you can use a particular component. And in case of AWS, there are the two type of scaling is available majorly. First is the auto scaling. So it offers automatically scaling based on the incoming workload. So it can automatically provision and decommission broker nodes as whenever the traffic pattern changes. For the dynamic scaling, MSK can scale based on the topics and partition. So it ensures that the each partition is handled by an available broker for you can say optimal performance. In case of the on-premise Kafka, we have some hardware constraints as well. Let's say physical limitation of on-premise hardware can impact the scalability. And whenever we set up the our on-premise Kafka, we need to be consider the manual scaling. we have to manually provide the hardware resource and configuration adjustment. And in own case, whether you are using Confluent, MSK, and on-premise, they all provide the high availability. Through the Kafka cluster replication, so replication factor is a important thing in Kafka. So it allows you to configure the replication factor for topics to like ensure the data durability and fault tolerance. So all of the three are highly available. So Kafka's main feature is also is highly availability. So yeah, let's move on to the next slide. So and deployment and management. The first point is the deployment options. So if I talk about the Confluent, so it offers a various deployment option, including Confluent Kafka is there, a fully managed cloud service, and Confluent platform that is you can say self-managed or cloud or on-premise. And there is also new term as Confluent platform as a service, that is CPaaS is also available in Confluent. In case of AWS MSK, it abstracts much of the infrastructure management away and making it easier to deploy Kafka cluster on AWS cloud. For on-premise, it involves deploying and managing Kafka cluster within your own data centers or your within your own infrastructure. So if I talk about the ease of setup, setting up the Confluent platform may involve multiple components like Kafka is there, Zookeeper is there, schema registry is there. While Confluent Control Center help manages them, initial setup can be little bit more complex as compared to AWS MSK. So if I talk about the AWS MSK, it provides a simplified setup process where you can launch a Kafka cluster within just a few clicks in AWS Management Console, or through you can also use the AWS SDK as well. And setup or your on-premise Kafka can be complex, time-consuming, and also a little bit headache and a little cumbersome as compared to other cloud providers. So if I talk about the community support, when it comes to the community support, Apache Kafka community is typically the most extensive and diverse. And both Confluent and AWS also have their own supports resources, but broader Kafka community provides uh, lots of knowledge and resources for Kafka related topics and challenges whenever you face in, let's say, development part or deployment parts. So next slide is about the security and pricing. So authentication authorization is the most important factor. So Confluent provides authentication mechanism different, including SSL, TLS, and SASL is also there, and it also provide RBAC role-based access control for fine-grained authorization. And in case of AWS, AWS uses the AWS IAM, that is another service of AWS, and it also give you the flexibility towards IAM policy to implement the authorization part. And for on-premise, it mostly uses the Kafka's default SSL, TLS, or SASL. And for authorization, it uses the ECLS. Stands for Access Control List. And for encryption, Confluent offer encryption in transit and at rest. Same goes with the AWS. AWS also provide the encrypted data in transit and at rest both. But if I talk about the on-premise, then you have to implement it manually for data in transit and at rest encryption. For auditing and monitoring, Confluent Cloud Center provides the centralized monitoring and auditing capabilities. And whereas the AWS also have their other services, that is CloudWatch is there, I think CloudTrail is also there, that can be used to monitor and build audit the MSK clusters. And monitoring and auditing solution need to be set up manually in case of the on-premise Kafka. And if I talk about the schema validation, Confluent schema registry is there for Confluent, and in AWS there is a glue schema registry for AWS, and for on-premise you have to set up your own schema validation or schema registry. Let's move on to the pricing model. So I'll show you in the next slide pricing difference between AWS, MSK, and Confluent platform. But in case of on-premise, there are lots of cost that includes the upfront cost is there, operation cost is there, scalability cost is there. So you have to consider lots of things like before moving on to the on-premise Kafka. So now let's compare the pricing between different AWS and Confluent platform. So as you can see in this image, we have the compute hours is basically doubled in case of the Confluent platform, and other components are similar, not a much spike in prices. And if I talk about the schema registry is free in case of AWS Glue and in AWS MSK because it has the AWS Glue as well. And for schema register, you have to pay a little bit amount for Confluent platform. So now let's move on to the conclusion part. So uh, main conclusion is that if you have less expertise and uncertain workload, then Confluent's breadth of feature and support comes out ahead. And let's say you have experienced Kafka engineers and very predictable workload, then you can save money with MSK as you see, saw in the previous slide that MSK is little bit cheaper as compared to Confluent Cloud. So for some specific requirement, you can also go with the on-premise Kafka, but nowadays nobody goes with the on-premise Kafka because uh, it need a lots of time, also effort. So mostly people go with the different clouds. So I hope this help, and you can choose better cloud Kafka cloud provider, and in some case you can also choose the on-premise. So yeah, thank you so much.